Hello. All right. I think we're pretty close to getting started here. Thank you guys for coming in. I really want to, thank all of you guys for making it for the Logger panel. And I want to thank these guys for coming in. We got Matt, Brett, and Chris. So give a big hands up for them. I think I really want to, as we discussed, we want to kind of break this down into a couple different categories with a lot of Q&A. So that's what I was trying to figure out, if we have the microphones working better from the guy, which would be great. But we want to start off, first off, is kind of like break it down into 3 different categories. One is really like the ingredients. Go from ingredients, then go into the production process, and then go into cellaring and that process too. So if that's our keys. So I think really about it, like for us, all of you, talk about it. It's like the importance of raw ingredient decision and why you decide on what you're going to do in the process of making a gray lager. So I opened it up. And let's have this open discussion. That's Matt, you're the guy.
It's great to be here. Pretty funny to see an old mentor of mine, Greg Jarosky, here as well. I don't really kind of know why I'm on this stage, but I've head brewer of Breeze Brewing, and over the years I've learned quite a bit about how to do this style. I think it all kind of adds up. We're going to talk about probably a few different angles to it. Ingredients, process. It's not one thing. It's a lot of things coming together. And I guess most of all, as probably most people here know, it's the most exposed style of beer. It's the most exposed style of beer, so we try to be pretty shrewd with our ingredient choices and take that, I guess, fairly seriously. We typically, use malts that we really like to use. Honestly, if we're going to use a malt that we haven't used before, we probably test it on a Seitan before going into doing a lager. For hops, can go a lot of different angles with it, but typically for lagers, we're thinking quite a bit about using traditional varieties, and then over time learning where we can kind of sprinkle in some new stuff, but not having the new stuff take center stage. Like recently, I've been oddly thinking a lot about complexity of hop bitterness, trying to get away from alpha acids is like a key. And thinking more about something I've been learning about recently, auxiliary bittering compounds, which is to say there's a lot more in hops than just this one thing. Been learning that a lot from our reps, so going to suppliers has been a huge help. But specifically on COAs, thinking about beta acids, oil, co-cumulone percentage, and how you can kind of build out a recipe from an ingredient standpoint for kind of a layered, simple profile. At the end of the day, a lager is supposed to be something that's like simple and easy to drink and easy to enjoy. But then you kind of want it to be a craft lager that is worth spending a little extra money on it. That has these layers kind of like subtly introducing themselves. So at Breeze, we think a lot about coaxing flavor out of simple ingredients. The more that you can get out of the things you already know, rather than layering a lot on. And that's, honestly, it's tough to talk about because it's just something you feel and learn over time, and work with suppliers on. But
I think we have really very sort of like kind of traditional approach one. Citra. We talk a lot about putting Citra in that sort of thing. So I think these guys are on the same page with a lot of stuff. A lot of what Mal said about the 3 is sort of our approach of wild yeast. in general, my approach to my beers is I make a lot of classic styles across the board, and so I try to use the ingredients from another place. It sounds basic and simple, but it's not always the most cost-effective thing. So like, Moravian full malted Pilsner malt, for our Czech styles, and that's where our focus is with our lagers in particular. Our New York City water being fairly, at least according to what it says in what's they were building water profile. It's kind of a jumping off point for us, and my system just really enjoys double decocting. I have a two-vessel system, so we choose our malt based on the process so much. I was starting off with like more environment malt, and I find it's so well modified, it converts too easily, and I needed a lesser modified malt, so I started using other things. And yeah, a lot of like, that's just like good quality, simple ingredients. Most of my like Pilsner type beers are effectively smash beers. They're like German style. I might layer in a little bit more hopping. We actually brewed a collaboration beer with Threes the other day, and we did a little bit more layering, just because there's not a whole lot to do when brewing like a third Czech style Pilsner. So like playing around with hops a little bit was easy to throw yeah, I mean that's I don't know what more I can add.
Well, I just want to add one thing I just thought of, or probably Chris has a lot to say. But like, something that I started doing a lot of Threes that I'm thinking about more in the recent stuff. We actually bitter with low alpha hops. We bitter a lot, and bitterness is really important. I do find that like when I drink American lagers that are under bittered, there's something kind of missing throughout the pint. So I think kind of getting bitterness composition in first and foremost. Typically with low alpha, which means probably more upfront, like leaf matter or whatever. I think is something that I've done quite a bit here, more than the more cost-effective way, which is bitter in a small amount of Magnum. And Threes we've scaled quite a bit. Our Pilsner Vliet. And there was a lot of incentive for me to change that and to start using a lot higher alpha stuff. And I think it's really an essential part of the Pilsner style.
Hey, we were talking about it earlier, but I think it's important. Yeah, it's like having that like little bit of like that bitterness punch in the front with that note, and then where it has that clean finish on the end. But you have to have that, I think, to really balance out that clean, crisp. It's very important.
Yeah, I mean, to touch on a couple of points that have been brought up already, and I'm Chris, Brewery Paulus, will be open someday. My CV, if people don't know, I was the head brewer at Schilling Beer from 2018 to 2020. So Matt talked about C of A's. Like, you should really be looking at these C of A's. You should be, studying them, knowing what your malt is coming in, knowing what the hops are. It's a lot. It's critically important. Kevin just touched on it too, and Matt as well. The number one thing that I taste in a lot of people's lagers is they'll hand me a Pilsner and like, this is a Pilsner, and I'm like, man, this is super sweet. Like, did you bitter this? And that's, some of these styles are meant to be bitter. Don't be afraid of it, like embrace it and educate your consumer on it, why it's important. I'm going to make a very controversial statement regarding ingredients. Weyermann is not the only malt that exists in my make German Pilsner. So, there are plenty of domestic, maltsters. There are plenty of just other maltsters. Something that we're focusing on a lot is reducing our carbon footprint. And so, like, trying to work with maltsters here, closer by, and, having an expectation of like what we're getting from them, so that it's not, efficiency issues or whatever we're having. You want to talk to the maltster, talk to your maltsters. If you're having issues, the only way that they get better is by getting input. You know what I mean? So, the overalls are really nice, and it is good, consistent malt. But there is more out there than just Weyermann. So,
yeah.
And then going from production over to like, you know, like that process of brewing, so we want to talk about like how that is going. But then also, you know, there's always pitfalls, and there's specific pitfalls for lagers, so we want to talk about those pitfalls that you should be watching out for. So I want to ask you guys about that.
Pitfalls. I would say like one of the biggest ones is making sure that your pitch is large enough. You know, I don't necessarily ascribe to the idea that it's 3-to-1. Basically, that your pitch needs to be 3 times what a male pitch would be. You should know your cell counts. This is critically important. Lager yeasts tend to be a little less forgiving than pale yeasts as far as that goes. And you can have salt fermentations or flavors very easily because they become stressed. Acetaldehyde will become very apparent, and if you're not doing the proper T-rest, like it doesn't have the temp to really clean itself up, and even with time, like that may not clean up. So, you know, so that's, I would say, one of the big things to focus on.
Yeah, for sure. You know, I figured we were going to talk about like mashing and stuff, but it's like you can't talk about mashing without talking about yeast. They're linked together. And at Threes, we started. We have the shittiest little most effective lab in the world. I mean, it cost us $200. You know, with scope, and we count cells, and it just makes sense, right? It makes sense that something that is such an exposed style that kind of intuitively is like a style of precision that you need to be precise about your fermentation. So yeah, we do cell counts, viability counts. We do not pitch cone to cone. I think it's pretty important in this process that, you know, every brewery is different. People have their different ways of doing things, and I've seen really smart cone to cone setups, like with inline counters, which are things, there's technology out there to do it. But in terms of what I've seen, cone to cone, you don't see what's happening. So you're kind of in the dark. You can take counts along the way. Maybe you get a count in the beginning and you average out what it looks like at the end. But it just makes, I mean, we harvest into a grain, count it, and then pitch based on the count. You know, for me, I work on the schedule, which I think is also critically kind of connected to flavor, because like the brewery is about rhythm. So we know our yeast really well. We use 2 lager yeasts on the brewery consistently, but one we use quite a lot, the German yeast, and like we know we like to harvest that on day 12 and pitch it on day 12, which means that like when I make the schedule, I kind of keep it that way. I don't say, it's fine, we'll pitch on day 15 or 16. We just know the viability is going to go down. So the cell count part is just, I think it's something that everybody should do. For us, it was a little bit intimidating in the beginning. It was actually like really easy to put in place. And we got over that hump where we felt like we were using kind of bad science, and now it all makes sense and it's predictable. Our fermentations are, you know, like 10 days, and then there's a couple days there where it's kind of cleaning up, and then on day 12 we're harvesting, and on day 14 we're starting to crash, and that happens every time. It's not like some beers where, it's like going a little slow, it'll get there. Because I think if something is going slow, it's indicative of a problem. So these things should be predictable. You know, it's like the art and science coming together. The science part here tends to actually make a big difference.
Oh yeah, I echo what these guys are saying. Yeah, you gotta count. You know, honestly, there are times when you get to know your yeast really well. We have one, we use the Raquel H strain, and for every beer, and you know, you might, if you get to know it, you'll know basically how much you're gonna need at like Gen 6 or 7 versus like Gen 2 or 3. But you know, you gotta know what's going on in there. It's not hard to get a program set up where you're going. So I mean, I would do that for anything. Honestly, all I can do is not just lager, but and yeah, I also would try to go to government. I don't trust it. Things that help different beers, different times. So yeah, we do a little bit faster process we typically brew, or at least our fermentations are usually in a place by day 7 where we're ready to harvest some of the yeast. The beers are mostly done usually pretty close to diaster rest and get expanded by about, we try to brew one more per week every Thursday while we get along. That's kind of our move, and then we sort of try to take the yeast out to like going as far as 10 gens. That's my preference. I think it starts to drop off after that, but I love it in like 7, 8, 9, or I should say 6, 7, 8. That's where for me or Cal just 6. Because we could talk about the mash tun too, but I did.
Yeah.
Oh, as far as pitfalls go, I mean, that was like one of the big ones that sticks out to me is just, there's the previous lecture in here about yeast management. It's critically important. The other things that I see a lot of times is really low mash temperatures. And I'm not sure where that originates from. Mashing at like 147, 148. I mean, maybe you're trying to produce a really dry beer and so be it, but I don't know that necessarily may be the best example for this particular style that you're doing. Don't be afraid to mash at other temperatures if you're single infusing. I always recommend step mashing if you can do it, decocting if you can do it. I'm a big advocate of it, but I know Matt does not.
Yeah. Well, how do you square what you said about sweetness and lagers and not mashing well?
It's balance. I mean, it's creating balance between the hopping rate and the finished beer, and also understanding perceived sweetness and what like your attenuation is going to be with your lager strain. So like understanding where that beer is going to finish, and then knowing how to like adjust your ingredients to give you the final product you're looking for.
Mm-hmm.
So you're essentially saying using that bitterness you're talking about to crisp it out, not depending on taking all the sweetness out of it?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the struggle that I have with a lot of beers is, especially for like Czech Pilsner, is that I feel like there should be some level of roundness to it. And a lot of times I taste things and say, man, I can't tell if this is a Czech Pils or a German Pils. And if I can't make that distinction, and that's kind of a broad statement because obviously, like, saying Czech Pils is a very broad topic. They order, there's a lot of like crossover, so there's not like a specific like this is it. I know we all say Urquell is like the quintessential, which sure, but the Czech Republic there's a wide range. But to me, it's always a fuller body beer, a little rounder, and not sweeter, but there is more like that malt character to it. And so typically it's finishing a little higher.
Yeah, I find I agree with that. I think it like kind of depends what you're going for, and you try to like create the balance around it. I think it is, lagers or styles of balance. Like our Czech strain finishes typically around 3.5 Plato, and our German strain we aim for 2. So we go dry, but it's I don't know. I feel like this is all like, I knew this would happen, but it's like oddly reductive, like how humans talk about things, especially brewers. And as you kind of get deeper into it, at least speaking for myself, I've learned, about body is created beyond, sugar levels, right? So you have something that has a cold fermentation. If it's given the proper amount of time, it's not filtered, it strips things out. Maybe it's spondied, it gains a little texture there. And then there's just this mystery. I mean, frankly, it's like also the limits of what I can understand from a scientific perspective and how much I really care. But like, if we give our beers like 2.5 months in the tank and it's 2 Plato, there's something oddly full about it. And I don't know what's happening. I know that if we biofine that at a month and strip the yeast out, it would be different, right? You can't just shortcut these things, which is probably the biggest thing that I guess differentiates ales and lagers, besides for needing a depth punch for balance sake, which ales just often, I mean, ales are broad, but at least as far as I'm thinking about it right now. But yeah, with lagers, you need time. And it's time that a lot of us don't have. At Threes, like, the situation was created, the conditions of the brewery were created so that we could give beers time. We got a lot of tanks. We had like 13 tanks there. That means, letting things sit. And that was a challenging trade-off in New York City where rent is high. It was a very specific choice. I think potentially, financially, we've suffered over the years because of it. In the long run, I think it makes sense. You have to be committed to these things, but you do have to give them time. You can't just like filter it out in a month and expect the same product. And I think there's something mysterious in how yeast creates body when it ferments cold, slow, with minimal pressure. In the Czech Republic and in Germany, they do a lot of open fermentation. We haven't had the pleasure of doing that, but I imagine open fermentation into a tank with a spunding valve, you are doing something different to the structure of that thing. That Americans, fermenting a lager at 55, 60 degrees and trying to speed it up, every strain is different, of course, but it does take away some of those little components in there.
Yeah, I agree. I'm thinking about one of these times when we're on the last gen of just take the dry hop pour off and see what happens with the fermentation. I don't know, maybe we cause some pressure on it, or it may stay on. I don't, we'll see. Might be wrong. I send it to him. That's what I'm saying. If it gets infected, I'll just send it to we'll check it out. If we think it has some hope, we'll send it to some barrels and we'll go from there. But anyway,
Saison.
yeah, well, I'm thinking about Saison. Sorry. Should I leave now? No, I mean, yeah, I've definitely noticed. Well, for one thing, I mean, yeast. My yeast never spends time in a break, other than between the time when I harvest it and I pitch it. With ale yeast, I'm occasionally. I don't find my ale yeast does very well left underneath the beer for long, but like lager yeast. If I need an extra week, I can just leave it there. It's fine under pressure. It's fine. It's fine. It's used to working over temperature. So, to me, lager yeast is a lot more hard than ale yeast. Sorry.
I agree with that.
At least the Urquell strain versus Cone.
No, we've seen that over the years for sure, like doing viability counts on ale stuff, and the lager strains typically hang out in the higher 90s.
Yeah.
And the other stuff drops off.
Absolutely.
Basic like cellaring practice stuff is like learning to get the yeast out of the tank as early as possible, right? It's like once it's done. And it's dropped out. And once it's done, like with sugars, it's probably in a state of I don't know what happens if they just become cannibals and start eating each other, but they definitely like are unhappy and looking for other things to eat and start to break down their cell walls. So harvesting early, that gets back to the schedule part, but I think it's pretty important for the overall viability and health of the thing. And like at Threes too, we started to learn a little bit more about we were having some issues with fermentation, and we increased our water to grist ratio on our mash, and that made a huge difference. We're 100% single infusion brewery. We have an old pub system that can't really do anything else. You can make great lagers with it. I won't name any names, but plenty of famous people out there doing awesome stuff. They don't decoct, they don't step mash, and yeah, we increased the water grist ratio, which I guess increases the enzymatic activity in the mash, and it dried the beer out and made for a complete fermentation. Got rid of some kind of like pizza dough quality to the finished beer, this almost like doughy thing that made a huge difference. And like mash pH, something I've also learned about over the years, it's like and knockout pH, just like tracking it, making sure your last running pH doesn't go too high. So when your last running's pH goes high, you pull out bitter tannins that you maybe don't taste in other styles, and in this style you do. So all that stuff is like linking the mash to the fermentation, and I don't know, I guess just
Yeah, I think pH on that's a big thing. It's like tracking that pH and watching that. I think that's a huge portion of it. It's just knowing where your acidity level is. For sure.
And I think if there's like one thing to take away from this panel, basically, with lager, there's nothing to hide. So hitting your mash pHs, doing these types of things, they're going to make a bigger difference in the final product. You can get away with a lot more, I would say, if you're making double IPA with a bunch of Citra. But you can't, because it's going to be apparent and people will notice. Will consumers notice? I mean, maybe. I mean, it's hard to say, but you may notice, and it may be something very simple that you can do to adjust that.
Yeah, one thing I've also, I know you agree, but it's like the dry yeast, right? So I'm pretty much a firm believer in liquid yeast. But I have recently learned about great ways to use dry yeast that I didn't know before. I don't think the answer is like, if you want to do 3-to-1, you look at the pitch rate and just launch the whole thing in. But having like a starter made with the dry yeast so that it's ripping when it's pitched into the tank, I think actually can make a pretty sophisticated lager. I don't know. We don't do a ton of it. I think that probably goes for a lot of, not just lager trays, but ale too. It's just like getting the thing active when it's going into the tank helps.
I did it with ales. I've never tried it with lager yeast because I'm always afraid that the temperature that I need. I do it like a co-star for my on a 30-barrel system. My ale is almost negligible cost. It actually costs more for DME than it does for the yeast itself. But I haven't tried it with lager because I'm afraid that I'm going to keep esters out there and be in the first year. But I fully agree. If I figure out how to do it, it's amazing because we're basically skipping to like. You're skipping to the first generation after the first pitch with your first beer. It's like, it works great. You tried it? You tried it with?
Not in the building. Yeah. See the other breweries that have setups that are hooked up to glycol, which are, maybe a little less practical. Yeah.
I might play around though because it's a new pitch yeast for me. Significantly.
At least you get 10 gens of it.
You're not always, but yeah.
I guess one other thing I felt was worth touching on today is like everybody has a different approach to these things, so I'm purely speaking for myself. I do find that American lagers are just way over hopped in the whirlpool, and I don't know what that is. I don't know if it's like we're pale ale brewers at heart. We all came from Sierra Nevada, or we're just used to making hazy stuff, or we think that's what they want, what the customer wants. Personal preference, right? But just the over kind of investment in whirlpool fruity notes in the lager. Lager's still hazy when it gets to the glass, so maybe not giving them time as well, and it's just kind of this like hoppy, fresh, but like, is it a lager? Is it a Pilsner really? It's just something I noticed. So like at Threes, we did a collaboration last weeks ago with Halfway Crooks in Georgia. Learned a ton. Actually did a big whirlpool load with whole leaf hops and pellet hops, like more so than we would normally do, but they were traditional varieties. And I'm curious to see how that kind of comes about in the final product with like a lot of bitterness added in through the blow. So I'm not saying it's like necessarily like whirlpool is not a good move. It depends what like Italian Pale is different than other styles. I know Czech, it's kind of nice to load it up, especially with all that sweetness. But I go out there, I taste beers, and I'm like, oh, this tastes very American. And for me, that feels like it's, I don't want to say it like, it feels lame to be a traditionalist, but it just seems like I guess I just love the beers from Europe. So I just want more of those made with like an American clean. Well, yeah, certainly. Well, a lot of beers from Europe are not clean, right? So it's Americans are doing that pretty well.
Yeah. No, I agree. I actually for our continental style longer, I typically don't add hops after 10 minutes. I have them like so check on those like a 30-minute SOTS edition, and then usually around 10 minutes, 10 minutes. No, the beer we did with Breeze the other day, we did a Whirlpool edition because it's ultimately destined for a fooder, so we thought about that from a process standpoint. I've never done a fooder lager before. They more or less invented the style, so we were talking about like what is lost in the process and that the hop, I would say the hop character falls off through the fooder aging. So Daniel's and so so we made so I think it's a conscious decision about what the end product of the beer is going to be, where it's going to go, how it's going to be presented. It's good. We also did it was really cool. We did with a collaboration out at Kane a month or two ago, and instead of throwing a Whirlpool at the end of the oil, we did work clearing in a cool ship, and we used whole leaf sauce hops from the ABI farm, and that was really cool. Like a big burst of whole hop. So same kind of activity. Can't wait to try that beer.
Pretty good. So with your the sauce up, so that goes back to kind of like recipe decisions. So you're deciding on those particular hops, which are crazy. I think that's one thing we should think about too. And talk about like going from grain or to hop. We're choosing these certain specific things for that reason. So if you talk about why you guys decided that, really.
Oh, I mean, I think sort of between line and Matt was saying, like, you need to, I think, lower alpha hops are more or less going to be your friend if you're going to do the Whirlpool thing. Otherwise, you'll have very delicate or it should be sort of like pale kind of territory. We made that decision because we wanted to, we're in work clearing in a cool ship is not something you do every day, and also it's like it's sort of like reducing the temperature. There'll be a lot of temperature loss because in their processes to go to the cool ship, it gets loaded into totes, forklifted across their parking lot to their whole facility where the cool ship is. So we knew we'd have a lot of temperature loss. So similar to the Whirlpool that you would do for an IPA at a reduced temperature, we added the hops there. So we were going to get a big punch of like that right sauce. But that was kind of good.
Yeah.
I wonder if you could kind of walk through, and I know each piece is going to be a little different, and you've got your own thing, but kind of ideal conditions, like what is your program for some like fixing the package? Like how long are you hoping for fermentation, like primary fermentation? Like are you stepping the crash on? What are you fermenting that? Like kind of just walk us through your kind of like ideal time in the tank before it goes into package.
Yeah, I mean, we slot in a base of 2 months now, and with our check step, it's 2.5, and it's quite a long time, and it's all relative, right? But it's at this point just based on the schedule, without even tasting the thing, just 2 months, and then like different style. Like if we're gonna make stronger beer, it's gonna be longer, and by stronger I mean like. We made an alt beer that was 12.5. It'll probably just, and I know it gets silly. Some of this stuff gets like a little bit like, we just kind of, connects us to our brewery more by doing things like this. But yeah, it's like, so we're fermenting with our specific yeast that we, at 48 degrees. Like I said, I told you the amount of time it typically takes, spunding, crashing. We do step down the temperature when we're crashing now, which is a new thing. It's one of those things like, why not? Where we do like 2C a day. Our brewers insisted on moving to Celsius. I still don't understand it.
Better.
It's better. And yet, I do it like kilos. I don't know. But yeah, slowly stepping it down and then leaving it crashed. And that great CO2 chart is your friend. It's like, it works. You look at the chart and you're like, if this is sitting at 35 degrees and we want it to hit 2.7, hopefully spunding took care of most of that, but we wanted it 2.7 and we're at 35 degrees, tank should be at 10 PSI. And we keep it there, and it works. And then it sits, and there's a point at 4 weeks, 6 weeks where the beer is tricking you, and it's like, it's ready. Nobody's gonna tell the difference. It's fine. But those are decisions that you kind of make on your own based on like how much you want, to make it pristine or whatever. But yeah, it's usually 2 months. Do like to try to get it to be fairly cleared out. If it's not at 2 months, might add a dash of Biofine now, which is a very new thing for us. And last year we started brewing a lot of West Coast IPAs, which are weirdly linked in my mind to lagers. It's been great to re-engage with that style. But yeah, that's like kind of the,
Our process, I typically look for a 7 to 9 day primary ferment, then a step down, typically over 2 days. And then it's style dependent, but it will be anywhere from 20 days to 60 days is lager. And also when the beer is at 60% attenuation, I'm spunding. So, that I find is like kind of the sweet spot. It's gotten it past all of its ester production, anything that it's going to throw off. And, recapturing that CO2 is great. And then just monitoring it from there. And I think kind of Matt had kind of touched on it with the tricking. It's like, and then it kind of goes down to like taste. You're tasting it out of lagering and seeing, do I like it? Is it where it wants to be? And is it close to like what I think it should be? And then when I think it's ready is when we move it to package.
My process is almost identical to Chris's, like 7 to 9, 10, thereabouts, and then a short step down. And I typically, our house rule is at least 4 weeks. That's only, full confession, like in the summertime when everything's cranking, our distributors are all picking up and everything's flying, then it's some beers only get 4 weeks because I need to make a new product. But the batch of Patience and Fortitude that I made in like mid-November got packaged in February, and it was 11+ weeks to do it right. And there's things that happen. Was it good at 9 weeks? Was it great at 9 weeks? Yeah, it would have been probably good to go. But I had the time. I used the time. It almost becomes one of those like pounds per barrel kind of things. Like how high can you go? Sort of like how long can you lager? It's sort of fun. Just let it go. What I prefer to have maybe cut some time off of that. Sold another batch of beer in there. Yes, absolutely. But here we are. January hit us hard this year, so.
Dave with Outside Farms. Hey Matt, your move to Biofine, is that related to any particular ingredients shifts or more a function of logistics and scheduling?
Yeah, it was logistics, scheduling, and also just like the realization that fortunately in a brew pub you get to taste things that you rack at 8 weeks and you package and then you taste them a few weeks later when they're sitting on draft. And we were feeling like the subtle yeast in solution was not helping flavor. It was adding a little bit of distracting bitterness. So,
Thank you.
yeah.
This is kind of geared towards Matt, but for all of you guys. For most, we're single infusion mashing all of our lagers at this point. What's your sweet spot for pH as far as mash pH, boil pH, and then knockout, and why, and like what factors led you to that?
Why is the hard one? Yeah, so we typically do 5.2 on the mash. I'm totally cool with it going up to 5.3. We add lactic to the sparge water to keep the mash in check for drop runoff. We're typically dropping during the boil, so we start the boil at like 5.3, drop to 5.2, and then maybe add some lactic to adjust to 5.1 to knock out. So yeah, we target 5.1 to knock out on the lagers. Anything with like more malt character, we now target 5.2, a little bit higher. You know, it's like, would it be fine a little bit lower, a little bit higher? Probably, but we do make the choice to pull out the jug of lactic chemicals and weigh it and decide. So we've chosen that that's important. But yeah, typically 5.2, 5.3 for the mash, and then 5.3 by the time it's pre-boil, and then we're adjusting on the back end in the whirlpool for knockout. I think it's something with hop character and smoothness. I don't know. I like the way it tastes.
I'm curious if you guys could speak to what you're doing with water treatment. Anything specific? I mean, famous tech water is supposed to be uber soft, which lots of us in New York have naturally. But are you doing anything specifically to augment that? I have a suspicion that people who are really good at making light lagers and giving it that proper fullness are better at water treatment than I am. And I'm curious if you guys have anything specific for doing that.
Well, I think the pH thing is connected, but it's like, just a quick anecdote is like, we make this beer every year that we've made. This is the 5th year, we're making it next week. It's a collaboration with Bearded Iris called Dreams of Yesterday. It's an oyster pilsner. It's just a pilsner with oyster shells, not meat oysters. And it's so weird because that beer, the shells go in the whirlpool and the beer drops out. And that's some calcium carbonate in these oyster shells that are getting into the beer. And then we also like taste that beer next to our other German or other things that are similar malts, similar hops. And it's like really cool. It's like, you know, you like lick your lips, you feel like you're kind of drinking a beer at the beach. It's not like, it doesn't taste weird or like fish sauce or anything. It just tastes like something that has some salt. So by doing that project the first time, and now since then, we've seen the space between these two places, the place with our soft water where we don't do much, and that space where we're, you know, loading it up at the end. And I like all of it. And you know, and you start to, you know, like, I love Suarez beers, like, right? It's worth calling out in the lager panel, making some of the best beer in the state. His water is super hard and salty. Like, next time you have a Suarez beer, just think about it. You know, it's there. And so he plays off of it. He knows how to, you know, maybe dial back the hops a little bit. I don't want to speak for him, but I will. Dial back the hops a little bit because the water is going to be prickly and it's going to be taking some of that space. So when I think about water, I think about hops immediately. I think about seasoning kind of coming together. They're both seasoning. They're both things that like kind of hit your mouth at the same time. And so soft water, maybe you can kind of influence things a little differently. It gets really complicated, but we do a very little bit most beers.
Yeah, I mean, the New York City water, I do like to try to get we're nowhere near 50 ppm of calcium. I think it helps a lot of things along the line. Sometimes I do and sometimes I don't. I don't really, maybe if like the 10 Plato style goes, I'm more likely to bump it with a little bit of chloride. It's gonna help with that softness because it's gonna be a little bit lighter on the palate otherwise, despite, you know, boiling the mash sometimes. But you know, I don't have a hard and fast rule when it comes to the Czech beers. The German beers I feel like is a little bit more like, I'm trying to get more of that Suarez kind of character, or I'm gonna probably salt it a little bit more, and make it, a little bit more salty. So Graham.
All of you guys are doing a gradual step down, which is most typical. And that's something that you encounter literature a lot going from fermentation to conditioning temperature. To just do it gradually. But one of the things that you never see there is like a solid thought process about why, or what you're trying to achieve by gradually stepping down. And so we try it both ways. I can't figure out what I'm gaining by gradually stepping it down, and I'm wondering if you guys know.
Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, I guess that's just kind of like for me, it's like, it's a way of not trying to stress anything out at one time, to like slowly, gradually do it, not stress anything out. Theories behind it or whatever, yeah, I don't know, but that'd be an interesting thing to see if it matters.
I think the one thing I've read is on large tanks, heat convection currents, if you hard crash fast, it makes the tank go a little bit better. So like generating those heat currents is why you go slower. And if you go slower, it lets the debris, the protein polyphenol complexes bind together and precipitate out faster, which is why you might be wanting to biofine it before to get the yeast out as well, because if you drop it slowly, you've already let the debris come out, but the yeast is still in it. I don't know.
I don't have any input on crashing, but I did want to circle back on the water. Had a number of brewers asked me that they have the inverse problem where it's not soft, it's hard. And the simplest thing that you can do is just boil water in your kettle and let it sit overnight, precipitate out, and then run it into your compressor tank. It works phenomenally well. It may not be like the greatest thing, and I don't have any particular numbers as to like what the drop off is, but it definitely softens your water significantly. So you can make case use without fear.
Yeah, Joe, I don't know. We actually started doing it only recently, and yeah, the answer is why not? But that's because we're already giving it a lot of time, and we don't feel like those days that we're missing are. I also think there's like, I said it earlier too. It's like it does these wacky things we do connect us to it. Going to the tank every day and doing something physical with it is. It's a nice way to engage with it throughout its maturation, but yeah, I do it because our brewers get so happy when they do it.
Yeah, I don't know. I also don't have I don't know the science. I think we'll say over here sounds really good. I was kind of thinking of it as like until release last fall, rather than just being like, all right, show's over, go to sleep. Yeah, I do think that there's probably some benefit to not just arresting everything with a super hard crash, but there might actually be. I mean, what I need to do is actually study it with the same batch of beer, or like consecutively, and see what I like better, assuming like all of the variables are hit.
Yeah, so there's a difference.
Yeah, we didn't do it for like 7.5 years. So if you've had a lager from us that wasn't within the last 6 months, it probably was a hard crash. So it's just I don't overemphasize the importance.
All right, we're at about 5 more minutes left, so more questions. Anyone? No. Good.
I just want to share. You guys talk a lot about Pilsner and about later styles. What about some thoughts towards the more malt forward styles? Things that you do differently, and obviously there's going to be some changes to mash programs and all that, but also malt choices. Just your thoughts on the more malty style lagers.
I think looking at like for the more maltier lagers and stuff, it really comes down to, again, I think I can't put enough emphasis on pH. Like that really, I think, is the key in the mash tun and time.
Yeah, I also think like I like lagers that are balanced and light tasting. Even if it's dark, like our Czech dark lager, it got much better when we figured out how to cut the roast, if it amount on it. Actually, the first Czech dark lager we ever made was with you. Yeah.
That was one time.
Yeah. And for that one, I'm pretty sure we put the carafa in the mash. Sorry, around the Vorloff post mash, to not have the roast character shoot down our mash pH and make things a little bit too tart. But like I had a dark lager yesterday at a bar, and it was just so roasty, and it smelled like pretzels. And I think like it's like salty pretzels.
Astringency.
It's just like erring on the side of lighter, like we just put out an alt beer, And I love that style. And that is such a hard style. Like it's if you go to Dusseldorf, you go to just have at it. Like you're gonna have a ball. It's like the best thing ever. But it's like this paradoxical thing, and I think dark lagers should be paradoxical. They're like full, but they're light. They should be light. They should, so it's tough. I don't know. You learn over the years these little tricks. Every recipe's different, but we are always looking for a light character to it. Always.
I was gonna say this. I was gonna touch on the dark lager thing too. It's such a common thing to get a dark lager. It's like a bottom fermented water. It's like, or stout. Like some of them are so roasty, and like the craft special 2, 3, whatever, like asparge, or like cinema is your friend. The difference is so vast, and the drinkability is so vastly different. If you keep that like astringent roastiness out of there. That would make a lot more sense in a dark ale, but in a dark lager, it can be a little much.
Yes. I'd be curious if you speak to some of your considerations when you step away from using continental ingredients into New York.
Yeah, I've done a few years of New York ingredients. When using New York ingredients, I typically I err towards, honestly, Munich a lot with it. I find that a lot of the barley varietals being tried in New York tend to have almost a floral note to it in some ways, especially New Ale. I don't know what the growing rate of that is anymore, but new varietals coming out. But I tend to layer things in with other like malty or base malts because I tend to find it too light often, and so I then work with it to layer those flavors in using things like light Munich or Vienna, and it's one of those challenges I think that we have is working with the ingredients you have. I mean, especially with reduction of carbon footprint, it's like people are growing this stuff here and they're malting it here. German brewers aren't importing American malts to brew their Pilsner. It just that they're using the ingredients they have before them. So it's kind of the brewer's challenge, right? Like you have these ingredients, learn to use them, and a lot of it's experimentation. It's you have to try different maltsters, different barley varietals. Brett and I used Violetta. Was the first time me using Violetta as a barley varietal, and I thought it was a beautiful character to it. I'm super stoked to try to get my hands on Excelsior Gold and some of these varietals. I ask everybody constantly, do you have it? How can I use it? Can you send me a sample? You should be constantly tasting these varietals and asking for new samples to see how these change from the New York growers, because I think that there's kind of a sweet spot we can find with the growing and malting of them, and it's again the brewer's challenge to turn that into a beautiful beer, right? So yeah, get to know the maltsters, get to know the growers, constantly be tasting ingredients and thinking about how you can incorporate those into your process, so to say. If they're what you want, if that's what you want to work with, you know what I mean. So.
Well, that is our end of our session. Long time live.